Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It's getting a bit late and it's been a long day, so I hope you can still bear with me for one more hour. In this panel, we're going to address a number of topics. First of all, I'll invite the panel members to introduce themselves and the Center of Competence or the institute they represent. Then we're going to talk about differences and similarities between libraries and archives on the one hand and museums on the other, because these differences may affect the digitization process and also the role of centers of competence in relation to the digitization. Then we'll discuss some of the barriers that keep us from making progress with the digital library. And those barriers can be technical or organizational, as Sita mentioned in her presentation, or political, legal, financial. Then we will discuss the role of the COCs, the Centers of Competence, in maybe taking away some of these barriers. And then I'd like to finish with a number of suggestions for next steps. For instance, should there be collaboration between centers, or what do our users want? Is there any input for the roadmap deliverable of the Succeed project? And then I'll invite you from the audience to contribute to the discussion or reflect on the things brought forward by the panel. But first, let me start with Hilde Balk. Could you please introduce yourself and the Impact Center of Competence?
Thank you, Irene. I will now say something about myself, and I will do some shameless promotion for the Impact Center of Competence. And if you think I've heard enough about the Impact Center of Competence, use my little slot of 1 or 2 minutes to go get one of these. Where is that translation thing? To go get one of these translation things, because Stefan, these headphones, because Stefan is definitely going to speak in French. You are?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is your last opportunity to get one of these. And otherwise you will just have to follow it in French. Okay. I'm Hilde Balk of the National Library of the Netherlands. I was in the last panel, so you know that already. And we've been involved in many projects, and the biggest project we have ever led as a library was the Impact project, improving access to text. And this brought 26 libraries, research institutes and companies together from, I think, 11 countries. It was a 16 million euro. It was one of these big projects with a lot of research, and it brought us together to significantly improve access to historical text. We founded ourselves, the consortium was founded in 2007, and we worked from 2008 until 2011. And we had many results, not only tools, but this network that had sprung up between us that we found very valuable. There was also a lot of knowledge exchange going on. There was knowledge in documents, in training material. And we very much wish to sustain this. And this, for this, we founded the Impact Center of Competence. And this is a very light and lean organization, I could say. It is hosted by the Bibliothèque Virtual Miguel Cervantes, and the work is done jointly by the Fondation that is at the basis of this Bibliothèque Virtual, and the University of Alicante, who also works on this Bibliothèque Virtual. And they are very good hosts and organize everything very beautifully. Then all the partners, we now have 40 members, but a number of us are premium members. We do much more, we pay more, but we also we do much more. And it is really a distributed effort. In the first year of the center, the KB, for instance, did a lot of work on building on the platform of the center and on the tools. And still we are very much involved involved with everything in the center. I chair the board, but well, there's all kinds of networking contacts going on there. And then other partners like PSNC in Poznan, they do the hosting of the website, they do all kinds of stuff with the tools as well. I'm not forgetting any partners, but the board is now consisting of, I think, 7 members we are. And all the partners play a significant role in this center. That's how we keep the costs low and the benefits as high as possible. Now, as for benefits that I find in this center of competence, as a national library, we are very happy that there is an organization that takes care of the research into that area that keeps frustrating our users, the bad quality of OCR. The center does very much more in digitization, but the poor quality of historical OCR is a continuous issue, and it is for a certain number of our users, especially the scientific users, it is a terrible frustration. And it's very good that there is an organization that takes care, that coordinates the research, where you can always find an overview of the tools, how to evaluate them, how to use them. That's very, very valuable to us. But it is much more. It is also a community where we exchange knowledge on several levels. Just one tiny example. If you start improving OCR results, and you have already, like the KB has, 30 million pages OCR'd online available, then researchers use these in their research, and they build hypotheses on them. If you start improving those results, improving the OCR, the results of their queries may very well go and differ. That makes that their research results are not reproducible. How do you deal with this? Well, this question came up because KB is thinking of improving, perhaps dynamically improving OCR results, using perhaps new tools for this. So this question I just could drop in my network, consisting not only, by the way, of the Impact Center of Competence, but also of the OPF, the Open Preservation Foundation. And in this network, immediately I got back very, very relevant answers to this question about how other people dealt with this, how they had struggled with it, peers in other organizations who struggle with the same things. This is just a tiny example of how valuable this is to us. And for the rest, I think the whole day that we saw all these tools tested by people, what we can learn from each other, how we can support each other, it is really invaluable. And here I have a leaflet. And you can all get this from Rafael or Alicia.
Thank you.
Sorry for the long promotional talk.
Bonjour. Pardon, donc je suis Stéphane Reich, je travaille à la Bibliothèque nationale de France au service numérisation, mais je ne m'occupe que de la préservation, de la conservation des données numériques. Ce qui est particulier à la BNF, c'est que nous préservons des données qui proviennent de la numérisation. Historiquement, c'est notre plus ancienne activité dans le domaine numérique. Mais nous préservons aussi... Ça fonctionne la traduction, c'est bon? Non. J'espère que ça fonctionne, la traduction. Mais nous préservons aussi depuis plusieurs années maintenant des archives du web, issues de collectes du web. Nous préservons aussi des archives, des records, vraiment des documents qui ont un statut d'archive. Et puis, nous préservons aussi pour le compte d'autres institutions, ce qu'on appelle un service de tiers archivage. Donc nous avons construit un système de préservation qui prend en compte toute cette variété de collections et de statuts. Mais évidemment, la numérisation reste notre plus grande source de données et celle qui pose le plus de problèmes. Voilà, je reviendrai dessus si vous avez des questions plus précises. Je vais passer la parole à mon voisin.
Merci beaucoup. Daniel.
My name is Daniel Platings. I am director of a company in Belgium. We specialize on 3D reconstruction, digital restoration, but also on the interactive use of 3D. I'm involved in 2 European projects. On the one hand, I'm responsible within a Europeana project for the 3D, and I was also in a previous one responsible for the implementation of 3D in Europeana. And on the other hand, I am responsible within the VMUST Network of Excellence. It's a network of excellence for museum technology, for digital and virtual museums. I'm responsible for the dissemination and exploitation activities there, which also means that I'm responsible for the competence center of VMUST. So in this way, we have a lot of links here, and we can indeed compare a bit our ideas and thoughts on the approach for the competence center.
Thank you very much. Ed.
Hello, my name is Ed Fay from the Open Preservation Foundation. Until recently, we were known as the Open Planets Foundation, but we have just launched our new name, our new brand, and our new strategy. So if that's of interest to you, I'd encourage you to go and check out our new website, which has all of these details available. Our vision is shared solutions for effective and efficient digital preservation. So as a membership organisation, we serve our community through stewarding the results of research and also attempting to assist the process of maturing those into production. And I think that's one of the themes that we're going to talk about in the panel today. So OPF's activities are centred around technology stewardship, so dealing with open source software projects for the purposes of digital preservation. And we also provide supporting knowledge activities, by which we mean best practices, training, blogs and knowledge sharing and so forth. And we are very interested at the moment in what collaboration looks like over the next few years. So as a lot of large-scale research projects are coming to an end, I think the role of centres of competence becomes increasingly important, and also understanding how these centres should interact with each other so that we deliver maximum benefit and maximum efficiency to the community.
Thank you, Ed. You mentioned collaboration. In view of the many projects that are coming to an end now. We talked about the differences between museums on the one hand and libraries, archives on the other. Do you have any specific thoughts on that? Do you share the idea that there are so many differences, or do you think it's... Or Daniel, maybe you could first explain why you'd like to discuss this specific topic?
Yes, indeed. When I compare indeed this domain that is discussed here with the domain that we do, we see a couple of differences. One of the differences that we see within the museum world is that the museum world at this moment declares itself very ready to uptake a lot of technology. We did an enquête, how do you say that? Survey, sorry, some months ago on a lot of museums, and 80% of the museums say to invest significantly in technology in the coming near future. So that means, in fact, museums are ready for using digital technologies. On the other hand, museums don't have research facilities. That means that most have curators which deal with a certain amount of research. When I hear curators, most say we don't even come to research. We have a lot of other issues which we need to deal with. But when I hear the discussion, I see that there is much more research capabilities within universities, within research centers, available within the domain than there is for museums. So that means, in fact, that a museum director is in a completely other point of view. Is on the one hand willing and open to use technology, on the other hand has not much support, in fact, for taking the right decisions to bring in technology in his museum. And I think that's a bit what we try to focus on as a center of competence, in fact, is help, in fact, those museums in taking those right decisions, and also helping them in implementing this technology. And it's a bit of another approach because let's say the information or the yeah, the information structure is different. The way people get decisions, make decisions, is different.
So sorry, but how do you do this from your center of competence? Do you have consultants who visit the museums, or
yes? So in fact, we use an alpha to omega approach, as we call it, which is in fact that, and that is also what a museum wants, that we start in fact by orienting them. They come up with an idea, they come up with a problem, with an issue, and we say, fine, these are the typical solutions that you can do. This is consulting. And once there is a certain idea about what type of solution can be chosen, in fact, then we help them in or finding a right partner or going for public tender or something like that. So we help them in the process of acquiring, in fact, this knowledge and this technology. And where possible, we also will help in the implementation of it. And the issue was also brought up today. We also will then try to be instrumental in the maintenance of the thing. So that means really an alpha to omega approach in all its different aspects. One of the focus things we focused on, let's say, in VMAST is that quality. That is, if we deliver technology within museums, you need really to have a certain degree and amount of quality. So what is a quality? First of all, the definition of it in a museum. Second, how do you can maintain that quality? Once you have installed something, how can you make sure that it's still running in 3, 5 and more years from now?
That's a
sustainability issue.
Yes, well, Ed, does OPF have consultants that visit libraries, archives, or advise those organizations on, in their decision-making process, in taking up the right tools or implementing the tools in their workflow?
Certainly, I think that's a role of OPF, and it's a role for an organisation and for effort which exists beyond any one institution, which is why I think a centre of competence is so important. It's not only to facilitate stewardship and sustainability, it's also to facilitate discovery and adoption of the tools that are out there, because of course that is the very first step. And of course, adopting tools which are out there is often not as simple as saying, oh, okay, I'll choose A or B. It's actually a process of organisational change. It's a process of recognising your need internally, being able to express that in terms of requirements, being able to assess the market, being able to deal with your own training needs, perhaps deal with the creation of new staff posts and so forth. And so this is the whole suite of activities which sits around the actual tool or the actual software product itself. And I think these are certainly aspects of technology maturity which should be taken on by an organisation which exists outside of any one institution. I think I'd also observe that the fragmentation we see is not only within the cultural heritage sector as it's been expressed, so between libraries, archives and museums. There's also a far bigger world out there. So within OPF, we already see a separation between library participation and archive participation, and so this is very much on our agenda to address. And we have various ways to do this through collaborations, through participating in advisory boards for projects which are ongoing. But even beyond that, there's the world of scientific archives, there's the world of business archives, there's the world of records management, there's the world of information governance. So I think it's absolutely critical for us to understand how do we break down the language barriers and the rhetoric which exists within each of these domains, so we can actually start to understand those requirements in shared terms. Because at the end of the day, processes such as digitisation, such as digital preservation, are not that different out within those organisational contexts. At some level, you can share technology, you can share products, you can share solutions. So how do we enable that understanding? And again, without wanting to kind of recast, COCs at the centre of everything, I think, again, this is something which the sectors need to do. And again, they are stronger in aggregate through the centres of competence, forging those links and forging those directions.
And what is stopping you now from breaking down those barriers and reaching out to other suspects than the usual suspects? So beyond museums, libraries, archives, what's stopping you?
I think that communities tend to be very insular. So if you look around today, I think there are probably a lot of archives here today. If you go to a scientific archives conference, there are a lot of scientific archives. There doesn't tend to be a lot of cross-pollination.
No, they operate in packs.
Exactly, yes. So understanding that is a challenge, yeah, I won't deny it. I think it's the chance for advocacy. I think it's the chance for offering publications offering articles to domain publications. It's the chance to offer demonstrators. It's the chance to go and talk to people. And I think as well that the emerging market for solutions is an opportunity here as well. So through greater collaboration with industry, through greater collaboration with standards bodies, there's the opportunity to have a broader conversation.
Okay. Stefan, speaking from the point of view of a library,
Yes.
we just heard that libraries are very well capable of defining their own needs, at least what kind of tools they need. Could you comment on that? How do you go about this when you are looking for new preservation tools? Do you reach out to the OPF, or is there a consultant from the OPF who comes and visits you, or?
Je peux continuer en français.
Oui.
Non, je pense que les bibliothèques sont, en tout cas du point de vue de la préservation et du point de vue un peu français que j'ai, sont plutôt assez avancées dans la réflexion et dans la maturité qu'elles ont par rapport aux outils dont elles ont besoin. Et elles s'appuient depuis longtemps sur des outils qui sont permis notamment par l'action d'OPF. Ce qui est plus difficile, c'est de faire vivre une communauté qui est assez restreinte, mais dont, quand on parle de la communauté de la préservation, bien sûr, on inclut les musées et les archives. Mais c'est difficile de faire vivre une communauté qui a des besoins assez différents, mais qui n'est pas assez grande pour avoir chacun des outils différents pour chaque besoin. Enfin, les outils existent, mais on voit bien qu'ils ne restent pas en vie, en fait, très longtemps, s'ils ne sont pas utilisés par des communautés, par une communauté large, c'est-à-dire qu'ils ne comptent pas que des bibliothécaires, par exemple. Je peux prendre un exemple, on a un outil de validation de format qui est très utilisé aujourd'hui, qui s'appelle Jove, qui a été développé pour les archives institutionnelles. Le J de Jove, c'est JSTOR, c'est le portail de revues américains, de revues en ligne. Et c'est un outil qui est très utilisé aussi par les bibliothèques et par les archives traditionnelles, les archives historiques, en anglais archive, pas simplement record ou repository. Même en étant utilisé par une communauté large, on a du mal à le maintenir et à le faire vivre. Parce que tout ce qui... J'anticipe un peu sur la suite, mais les problèmes auxquels nous sommes confrontés la plupart du temps, ce ne sont pas tellement des problèmes techniques. Dans les bibliothèques, dans les archives, dans les universités, nous avons les compétences, mais c'est beaucoup plus la communauté, l'organisation. Faire vivre une communauté, ne serait-ce que pour maintenir quelques logiciels essentiels, c'est déjà assez difficile. Voilà. Et je voulais juste dire aussi sur les musées que je trouve que nous avons dans les bibliothèques des préoccupations qui sont très proches de celles des musées. Déjà, nous avons à peu près les mêmes missions, c'est-à-dire de conserver des collections et de les mettre à la disposition du public. Une des difficultés que nous avons pour collaborer, c'est plus avec le monde des archives, en tout cas en France. Je ne sais pas comment c'est au niveau européen, je crois qu'il y a des pays où ça se passe mieux que ça. Mais notre gros problème, c'est que les archives sont très préoccupées par tout ce qui concerne l'authenticité, la traçabilité des données, ce qui est important pour nous aussi, mais qui n'est pas toujours le plus important. Et elles sont très intéressées par des formats qui sont moins utilisés dans le cadre de la numérisation. Le PDF, les formats bureautiques, tout ce qui est issu de la suite Office, par exemple. Et ça signifie des outils différents. Et par exemple, pour le format PDF, on est très mal outillé encore aujourd'hui. Alors que pour les formats d'image, on atteint une certaine maturité.
Merci. So we can say that there's a lot of fragmentation in the field between libraries, archives, museums, and there's also different levels of, well, maybe not willingness to adopt new technology, but well, capability and capacity inside the organizations to take up new tools. Hilde, from the point of view of impact, Center of Competence, do you see any other barriers that keep us from making progress?
In working together?
Or maybe in more general, in reaching our users, or...
As a Center of Competence, you mean, or for libraries in general?
Both.
Yeah. Both,
yeah.
Okay. The barriers are still, now that I think back of when we started with the Impact project, I'm now talking of barriers to mass digitization. We said the reinvention of the wheel was one of the barriers, and I've heard that mentioned again today as something that centers could actually solve. But this is a very deep thing, it seems, this reinventing the wheel. And I'm not sure that even if we do the utmost to communicate and to network and to meet, and everyone knows what everyone's doing, that it would still not happen. It is perhaps even inherent. Maybe it is even inherent in innovation, that people would be very stubborn and go their own way and just find competing solutions. And it's also something that is in our users. I've seen so many tools for instance, in the linguistic area, and I've seen so many linguists argue over these. If the one has invented a very good tool for, let's say, named entity recognition, or a very other interesting linguistic tool, most often another one will say, well, this is not exactly what I can use. I will make my own, or I have my own tool. And I think this is very interesting. And a Center of Competence should not try to forbid people to reinvent the wheel, but should try to be them, perhaps to roll with all the wheels, or to bring the wheels together and stimulate people to show each other their solutions, and just open to promote some open-mindedness here.
Yes.
It seems a very trivial thing, this reinvention of the wheel, but it is one of the barriers that
That's
people...
not invented here syndrome.
Yes, exactly,
yes.
Exactly. It also is between libraries even. And one very refreshing thing that I saw again today, and that I've noticed before, is that people who are new to something, for instance, to full text conversion, they tend to be very open and use everything. And those that have been very successful in the past, like the bigger libraries, the BNF, the KB, the BL, tend to be more, well, not arrogant, but settled in their ways and very much less open. Yeah.
Okay, would any one of you like to comment on that?
Yeah, maybe I can make a bit of a comparison with the museum world, and there is a couple of differences there. What we try to do is really stick to industry standards. And that is probably because we don't need those kind of specialized tools that you need. I think a linguistic tool and so on is pretty specialized, I think, and cannot be left to a kind of commercial production. While what we need is mostly, we try to rely as much as possible on things which are out there, so that we are not responsible for not only developing it, but also maintaining it. And in fact, we let the market, in fact, decide which tools are used. And we use an approach that we are flexible. If one company dies tomorrow, not because they are doing bad for one reason or another, but some companies sometimes get bought, Look at maybe you know the Oculus Rift, the famous 3D thing. Is a very young company, has already been bought, so they're not in fact free anymore to move where they wanted to go. So that also can have an impact on what you can expect from that technology or not. But we structure in fact our data in such a way that we're able to move to other platforms. But we rely, in fact, for the software and for the hardware on what is considered as being more or less industry standard.
Yes. Well, I think it's a very interesting thing you mentioned right now, because in relation to text, well, sometimes if you want to improve OCR for a specific language or a specific font, that's really like investing in a niche yes. product, right? Yeah. And the market is not going to solve this for you. No. So, yeah, maybe Hilde-Lies or Ed, do you see a role for the centers there? Yes?
Yeah, so taking the example of OPF members, I mean, I think the adoption of standards is important, interoperability is important, but it's working out at what levels that is most effective. And for me, that's about making it possible to hook together smaller components and really to mix and match and chop and change. So if you have a not invented here problem, then you can run with your own solution. Or if you're happy to dive into kind of collaborative work, then you're able to do that as well. So amongst OPF members, for example, there is a high degree of fragmentation around the core systems that people run. So I think at most OPF, there are only 2 OPF members who run the same core repository system. Many others build their own in-house or deal with one of the commercial options or whatever. But once you start to look at the tools which are hooked as components into those systems, you sometimes have up to half of our members who are using the same tools and the same components within those systems. And so far, the market evolution seems to have focused on the big systems, on the integration frameworks, which, as we know, rely on open source tools and open source components, but their business model is around the support of the integrated system. So I think there's certainly a role for centres of competence to understand how that market is going to mature. Is there always going to be a separation between service contracts for large systems as opposed to development momentum around particular components? Mm-hmm. And so again, this goes back to addressing that fragmentation question. How do we have a mature understanding of market motivations? What would encourage suppliers to get more involved in this so that we're not there, you know, building our own tools, which are then kind of sold back to us in nice glossy packages with service contracts?
If I can comment there, it's also very interesting. We had a members meeting of the Impact Center of Competence in Madrid in May, and there were also many companies are members of Impact Center of Competence, and they expressed also the need to know what libraries, archives, museums as users really want, because they do want to deliver the quality that we need, but do we know what we want? One said, I'm very much willing to invest in a very expensive scanning apparatus, machine. And, but I am not sure whether they will even buy that kind of quality. And now we are not there to promote that kind of company, but this company can use the center to talk to people and to really find out if it's worthwhile to buy this. And the center can perhaps play a role in evaluating this kind of thing and saying, does it fit to certain standards? We could make a report on this. That kind of thing is very interesting. And it's not as if the users, so the libraries and archives are shouting on the one side and the companies are on the other. They're actually really keen to find each other. Yeah.
So there's a clear role for the centers as well. Taking this a bit further to the future, how do you feel about more intensive collaboration between existing centers in the area of digitization in Europe? Daniel?
I think it is pretty obvious that we do that. Let me give a couple of examples. Like Ed was saying, in fact, the concept of preservation pops up everywhere. We already talked with your predecessor, in fact, about, for example, preservation of games. Not of the normal games, but we use a lot of serious games within cultural heritage, which are much more than just digital assets. So how do you preserve them? How do you make sure that these things, because the technology of that evolves quite quickly, there are not good open source solutions for that. We've used both now within VMust. We have used Open Scene Graph and we use Unity as the two solutions. Yeah, Open Scene Graph is 5 years behind, in fact, Unity, but on the other hand, it's not open. Unity is not an open system, so that's a trade-off. So how do you preserve all these things? Because if you work in a cultural heritage domain, you need to have a domain in your mind of about 10 to 15 years. If you make something, if you start the project, in fact, you should be able to kind of run it for 10 to 15 years. And that is quite a long time. That means, in fact, that you need to be able really to deal with the preservation aspect and the maintenance aspect of that. A second example, I think what we really can cooperate on as centers of competence is, in fact, the funding. When we talk museums about our center of competence, in fact, they always say, it's a real great idea, we love it, but where's the money? And indeed, that's one of the big points. And I think one of the things we should do as a competence center is also help not only to realize a certain project and realize a certain idea, but also to help it fund it, right?
Oh, yeah.
And that means, in fact, that we could make a pool of funding specialists between the competence centers that can help us if it is funding for a digitization project or for a museum project. The funding itself is not really different. So in this way, we could rely on the same kind of pool of people that really are specialists in that. I mean, specialists in national funding, specialists like we had in the session before, and the different or structural funds or European funds or whatever, or different possibilities. Each of them have their own peculiarities and need really know-how to make a good, successful proposal. So relying on a kind of group of specialists that can help doing funding, to my opinion, would be a real big asset for the competence centers.
Yes, because the question is, of course, if you have the intention of collaborating together in this field, what kind of framework or what kind of structure or governance model do you choose for this collaboration? And now, if I understand you correctly, you suggest to have some sort of a pool of specialists for certain areas that are of interest to all the stakeholders. At the same time, the centers have their own specific stakeholders, like we discussed earlier. So the museums are different from libraries and archives for several reasons. Yeah,
definitely. But I think the pool of specialists should be really something that we maintain or that we use from the center of competence, and the center of competence then can provide, in fact, this know-how, this service to their members.
Okay.
And say, okay, we help you not only in realizing a certain idea or a project or whatever, but we also help you in the funding aspect of that.
Okay, yes. So actually there is some sort of collaboration already, Hilde Lies, between OPF and Impact, Center of Competence. Could you maybe say something on that?
Yes, that is something that makes me very happy, that we've signed a memorandum of understanding between OPF and Impact. Both organizations are very important for a library, at least, but also for archives and museums, of course, but for us as a library. And this is, we have agreed to work together on organizing workshops, sharing knowledge, and giving each other access to each other's activities, that sort of thing.
Also
but more
on the funding? Also on the funding, like Daniel suggested?
Well, if there would be a project where we could dive into aspects that affect both access and or digitization and preservation, that would be very interesting because in preservation there's tools around validation of formats, for instance, and in digitization there are tools to influence the image or the document before you do the OCR. I think around that process there might be some interesting ideas, but I'm not sure where the funding would come. But we might also start to think about doing a joint workshop at some conference on that sort of topics, but also on a more general level. In the digitization workflow, often it's not a surprise that there's two centers of competence that are heavily supported by libraries, one on preservation and one on digitization. This is often, in libraries, it's completely different departments. I know this is so in BL, this is so in KB. Is it also in...
More or less.
More or less. It has grown this way. And I think now we should make the step and say also at the beginning of the digitization process, we must take into consideration preservation aspects and, well, have links to both. And there I could imagine a sort of project popping up there at some point, but Ed could perhaps also. Ed is more the technical guy on this.
Yeah, I mean, my point was going to be about joining those aspects of the life cycle. So, you know, we know that projects have tended to fragment the research agenda. I think as a community now we're in the position where we really need to integrate and start to draw the products of that research and work out what works, what doesn't, throw it away gracefully. But certainly joining that life cycle so we understand right the way from selection to creation to preservation to use and reuse and so forth, and also have understandings of value and cost and economics which run right through that life cycle as well, instead of trying to cost a certain part of it, then worry later how to cost the other part.
Mm-hmm. Very strangely, yes.
Okay, the final deliverable of the Succeed project is going to be a roadmap document. This roadmap document addresses the question what future research is needed to help develop the digital library in the broadest sense, so also including museums, archives, etc. Do you have any recommendations or other issues you'd like to see in this roadmap? And it's written for the Commission.
I think one of the most important things that we should realize within the museum world is reuse.
Reuse.
And
yes.
that means, in fact, if we make a digital asset, it has a completely different nature than a unique physical object. And that means, in fact, that you can start sharing this, reusing this within the museums, because it's a digital asset. And there's also another, we need to make then museums make aware that if they digitize an object like that, then in fact that they are doing an investment. Because in fact, if they digitize that, they can recuperate a part of the cost again by having another museum using this, for example, another exhibition.
It's the economical aspect of
It's
reuse.
an economical aspect, but it's also a change of mind. It's changing from a cost to an investment. And that is we have done now, which we opened on the 23rd of September, 4 exhibitions at the same time on Roman culture, from Amsterdam to Alexandria in Egypt. And we have seen practically how equal these Roman assets are. A lot of things you can find all over the Roman Empire and you don't see the difference. Sometimes you do see some difference, but that means in fact that those assets can be reused over a very large number of museums. And if one museum digitizes those things, another museum doesn't have to do that anymore because it's available. And that is the kind of, I think, way of, because that also needs to get in a digital library, etc. We put those things on Europeana, etc. But I think having a kind of common structure around that on making the low-end version of that available for the public, and making the high-end version available for professional users like other museums. That would be, for me, one of the things we should really do.
So that's one of your recommendations for the roadmap.
Yes.
So focus on the aspect of reuse for the sector itself.
Yeah.
Should be more aware of that and see it as an investment instead of just a cost.
Yeah.
And Ed, do you have anything to for the recommendations?
So I think the trend that we're starting to see in Horizon 2020 in Commission funding is away from research projects and into infrastructures. I'm not sure how heretical this would be, but I often ask the provocative question, how much of a problem is this? You know, that we won't have very large projects which are producing various research outputs. But the one thing that I think does need to be taken into account is the fragmentation which still exists at the end of that period of very large investment of research. So I think I heard a figure recently of 100 or 150 million euros has been invested into digital preservation research. It's not immediately clear to me how that is being made use of within the new infrastructures which are being asked for.
Do you mean fragmentation in the funding or in the project results up till now?
I mean actually in the project results.
Okay.
So some project results have got reasonably stable long-term stewards, so for example through Impact or through OPF. Others don't necessarily, and it's not quite clear how some of those interrelate. Even given that picture of fragmentation, it's not always clear what's the long-term sustainability ambition.
Yes.
Is it expected that the infrastructures will now adopt these tools and sustain them, or what is the role of the centres of competence? And I think that's getting to the core of the structural funding which is needed. So what is the structural change that is needed in how cultural heritage is funded that goes right to the core of the question of the governmental involvement through to the cultural departments within government and the structural nature of the budgets and how that is diverted towards digital. I think there's still a lot to do to unpick that.
So that's your recommendation, to address this problem in the roadmap, and you don't have a solution for it.
I'll have to get back to you on that one.
Okay, Stefan, is there anything you'd like to see in this roadmap document, in the recommendations section?
Je vais continuer en français. Rien de particulier, j'avais quand même un exemple que j'aimerais vous soumettre qui pourrait être une bonne piste de réflexion, un exemple concret sur lequel la communauté a besoin d'avancer actuellement, et peut-être que dans ce cadre on pourrait réfléchir. C'est ce qu'on appelle en français un serpent de mer.
French we call a sea snake. Do you know what that is? It's a snake that comes out of the sea, goes back in, and then comes back again every 2 years. It's something that just keeps cropping up again and again, and they never solve anything. And this is the register of formats that is in the preservation community. It's quite a critical question, but nobody has found a solution. The idea would be to bring together in a single knowledge base all the knowledge on preservation formats. And that doesn't exist, not in the way that we need it to. So, technical registry, yes. The project has been run. Several projects have looked at this. Several Americans, European projects. Currently, the Australians and the New Zealanders are looking at that. And they are hoping to put together a project with European partners to take advantage of the Horizon 2020 funding. And this problem reveals the fact that it's not so much a technical problem. We can put together a functional register that machines can use and humans too, but it's a question of the community that would keep feeding into it, that would make it a living thing, that we can update when we have PDF2 that's going to come through soon. We'll need to describe that, and perhaps perhaps the problem comes from the fact that it's only people who are interested in preservation that have tried to solve the problem. And perhaps if we got together with people who are producing this, who are using these formats, but on the production side, then perhaps we would be able to widen out this community and finally succeed to have a real living tool. It's a big question mark right now. I don't know if it's possible. I don't know if it's something we should recommend, but I think it's a good example of looking at how we can.
Merci. Hilde-Lies.
I agree. I think the example of the technical registry is something that also sprung from the needs of libraries themselves and archives. And the European project or proposal is actually a sort of afterthought to the idea. And or afterthought, it is, well, it is nice if it's there, but I think we will pursue this idea anyway, and I think these are the best always. So I think, but that the European Commission should support that kind of effort, I would agree as a recommendation. And I have two others. I support also the structural funding that Ed proposed, and a way that the Commission could do this is not by because they don't like to give structural funding. They want to fund projects always. But who is in a better position to foster projects that really focus around technology transfer, for instance, than these centers of competence? I would say give them a sort of conditional structural funding. Just give, and not much, just give them like 100,000 a year and let them find the rest themselves, and evaluate them, review what they're doing, review what their users are saying, review the results, etc. They could even make it into a very nice sort of circus where we all present what we've done over the year and people can vote, sort of a roadshow or sort of idols of centers of competence, whatever. And if you don't perform, or if your community doesn't think you're relevant anymore, your funding goes. And it should also be supported by membership. And I think it is so much cheaper for the European Commission to fund a couple of proven communities as centers of competence just for a couple of years. It's so much cheaper and easier. And because they deal with professional people as well, who are used to reporting and everything. So then funding these €1 million projects of research, sorry for the researchers, but no, I think you could also give these centers money to give out calls for small calls, you know, for building new tools that the community themselves come up with. So they could actually take some work from the European Commission. So that was my second one. And I have another one which I think should always go with any kind of, it's a sort of, I think Carthago needs to be destroyed, competencies in cultural heritage. We need the new profile of people who combine an academic background, understanding of that, and technical proficiency, and that goes very far. The list of things that I want for new people becomes longer and longer. Actually, it's no longer just XML, or it's yeah. So and that should always be funded along the way as well. So it's a long list, but these are my recommendations.
Okay,
Daniel has another one.
Can I add something to that?
Sure.
Yes. I completely agree with you on one point. I don't agree. That's
interesting.
There are very few people that really can combine both. I mean, to be really good technician on one hand, in a certain technical specification, and on the other hand, within heritage, be whatever archaeologist, historian, librarian, scholar. Yeah. I think what you need to invest in, and what is, to my opinion, much more feasible, in fact, is that you remain the archaeologist, historian, scholar, but have a good knowledge of technology, not to apply it, but to understand it. And to have technicians also do the same, that they know as a technician what does somebody from the humanities needs, really, how do they think and so on. I'm a civil engineer. I have been making the step towards humanities, and I can tell you it is a culture shock. It is. It is a completely other way of thinking in humanities than we are in applied science. And I do in my own company that. I have an art historian, and I learned her how to make 3D and so on. After 3 years, we have to say, in fact, basically you will never come the real skilled, trained 3D artist that you maybe think you would be, but you are very good in knowing what a 3D artist knows, so cooperate with a 3D artist and make a tandem, in fact, make a team together, both understanding each other perfectly. That is, to my opinion, what we need to do.
Yes.
Not to make these kind of wizards that know it all, but couples.
Yes.
Of course, but what I meant, what is important there is the academic background.
Yeah.
That is, I mean, that is essential to
Yes,
it. Yeah.
Yes, well, I remember now something Carl Wilson from OPF said at the interoperability workshop when we talked about semantic interoperability. And he said, speaking the same language isn't the same as understanding each other. And that summarizes your point, I think, yes. Daniel. 100%. Yes. Okay. Well, we have to stop now, but not before I've asked the people in the audience whether there are any questions, any comments for the panel. Yes.
Is there no microphone? Oh, there.
Yeah.
I'm from the National Library of Scotland, and I'm the Digitisation Programme Coordinator. And before me, there was a Digitisation Manager, who's now the Preservation Officer. So we're actually sitting back to back. And my interest is also in digital preservation. So I know enough about digital preservation to work with a digitization or preservation officer to make that life cycle whole. So that where we start, that we take into account long-term preservation and access, and that we work together. So I just wanted to say that we're not. We have the opportunity to make it, you know, a comprehensive life cycle.
So you also work in couples?
In this case, yes.
Yeah, I think I would be very interested if you were willing to write, for instance, a blog about this at one of our websites, the OPF or Impact Center of Competence, because this is the kind of experience that is very valuable to others to hear from, or to come and speak at a workshop or something. I think we should keep that in mind, because it's pretty rare what you're saying there, isn't it?
Yeah. I started in April this year, so it's a new relationship, but it is interesting to for me as well, and to see it. You know.
Yes. Yeah,
okay,
please do share. That would be very interesting.
Yeah, very interesting.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
National Library of Scotland.
Elko, could you maybe come forward and talk us through your visualization of the discussion? And then we can see whether there's anything missing.
Well, I tried to catch all the things that I said, but I think it's not that complete. But I tried to get the highlights. It's about the difference between the different domains, the libraries, the archives and the museums. It's about fragmentation. And it started with the point that there's high investment in technology at museums, but there's not much experience in development, and that Center of Competences can help to share the knowledge. It was about that there are more markets than only those 3 that are struggling with it, and it's good to find those markets and to get them together. Hilary said something about reinventing the wheel, and that it's a part of the game. We have to accept it, and it's role of the center to keep the wheels rolling. Together, yeah. All those wheels, yeah. Not too far rolling. No. The investment is another point. It's hard to find investment for niche research, and it's very important to get the market motivations clear and to get clear what users want. And there's also a role for Center of Competences. Somebody said that it should be good to have a pool of specialists, and not only for the investment things, but also for other competences. And well, what was more said? The preservation of serious games was mentioned. That's one of those markets. Oh yeah, and it's very important when it's about preservation. It's important to look at preservation in the beginning of the process and not only at the end of it.
Beginning of the digitization process.
Yes, yes. Yeah. About the roadmap, there was those great idea of this circus of Hilde Lies. I see you standing there with the high hat, beginning at the circus of the road show. You don't remember. And it's very important to have a structural change of funding. And the last part was about the competences and the knowledge, and to get those together and work together.
Yes.
Well, do you miss anything important that's said today?
No.
No?
Well, thank you very much, Elko, for doing this. And it certainly helps us to get a good summary of the discussion.
Yeah.
And thank you to all the panel members for contributing. Thank you to all the panel members for coming to Paris and for sharing your thoughts with us. Thank you very much.